The nurse handed me a cup of water and I remember thinking the ceiling tiles had water stains shaped like a river. My legs were still numb from the epidural. The baby was in the warmer across the room, wrapped tight, quiet. My husband wasn't there. The nurse said he'd stepped out to make a phone call. That was 40 minutes ago. When he finally came back in, he kissed me on the forehead. Too quickly. The kind of kiss you give someone when you're thinking about something else entirely. I smiled and looked back at my daughter. That's when I realized something was very wrong. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was 31 years old, lying in a hospital bed with a brand new baby, and something in the air had shifted in a way I couldn't explain yet. My husband, I'll call him D, had been with me for 9 years. We met in our early 20s, married at 25, built something that looked solid from every angle. A house. Savings. Plans. The kind of life that feels permanent until it doesn't. The pregnancy had been difficult. 6 months in, I was put on partial bed rest. Dee handled the finances during that time. I didn't think twice about it. We'd always had a joint account, shared credit cards, shared everything. He was my husband. That's what you do. He was attentive during the pregnancy. Mostly. He came to most of the appointments. He assembled the crib. He drove me to the hospital when my contractions started at 2 a.m. But there were small things. A phone turned face down on the kitchen counter. A conversation he was having when I walked in that ended, not naturally, the way conversations end, but stopped. Like a door closing. A weekend trip for work that turned into 2, then 3, in the span of 2 months. I told myself it was stress. He was carrying more of the load financially. That kind of pressure changes people. I'd read that. I'd told myself that more than once. After the birth, he stayed for the first night in the hospital room. He held our daughter once. He took a photo of me holding her. He sent it to his mother. He was doing everything right, technically, but the warmth behind it wasn't there. On the morning of the second day, he said he had to go back to the house to handle some things. The pipes, he said. That leak we've been ignoring. I said okay. He was gone before my lunch tray arrived. That evening, my sister came to sit with me. She'd flown in from out of state. We were talking, and she mentioned something offhand. She was looking for DS number in her contacts to ask about parking at the house, and she said, "Is he still at that same number?" He never texted me back when I reached out last month. I told her I didn't know he'd texted her. She said it was nothing, probably just checking in about the baby prep. She moved on. I moved on. But I didn't forget it. Over the next 2 days I started noticing smaller things. He came to visit each morning but he kept his coat on the whole time. He never took his coat off. He sat in the chair by the window, not beside me. He asked questions about the baby's feeding schedule in a tone that felt like he was reading from a checklist. He never once asked how I was feeling. On the 4th day, I was discharged. He picked me up. He carried the car seat. He installed it correctly. He drove carefully. At home, everything looked the same. But 2 things were different. The filing cabinet in the hallway closet, the one where we kept important documents, was slightly open. I always kept it locked. And on the kitchen counter, there was a stack of mail that had already been opened. Not just opened. The envelopes were missing. The letters were stacked alone. Like someone had taken the evidence of when they arrived. I didn't say anything. I went to the bedroom and fed my daughter. That night I heard him on the phone in the backyard. I couldn't hear words. Only his voice, low and even, for a long time. I could have gone to the window. I could have opened the door and asked who he was talking to. I didn't. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The first thing I did was open a private email account. Not on my phone. On my laptop, in incognito mode, during a nap my daughter took on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet. I just knew I needed somewhere to put things. Somewhere he couldn't see. The second thing I did was call my bank. Not our joint bank. My bank. The one I'd had since I was 19, before I ever met Dee. I still had a small personal savings account there. mostly untouched. I'd almost forgotten about it. I asked them to mail statements to my sister's address going forward. She didn't ask why. She just said okay. That was the first week home. The second week, I started paying attention to the joint account. Dee handled most of the bill payments. That had been the arrangement since I went on bed rest. I hadn't looked at the account closely in months. I'd seen the balance occasionally when I checked my phone. It looked normal. Healthy, even. But now I started reading the actual line items. The transactions loaded on the screen and I sat there at the kitchen table while the baby slept in the next room and I read every single entry going back 6 months. It took me a while to understand what I was seeing. There were transfers. Regular ones. Not to utilities. Not to the mortgage company. Not to any vendor or service I recognized. They were going to an account I didn't recognize. A routing number I'd never seen. Small amounts at first. 400 here. 600 there. Then they got larger. 1,200. 2,000. Once, in the month I delivered $3,500 in a single transfer. Over 6 months, more than $22,000 had left our joint account. I didn't move. I just kept reading. I screenshotted everything. Then I emailed the screenshots to the private account. Then I requested full printed statements going back 8 months through the bank's online portal and had them sent to my sister's address. I closed the laptop and I made myself a cup of tea. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. I didn't cry right then. I felt something colder than crying. Like something had been confirmed that I hadn't fully admitted I already suspected. The third week, I found the other thing. Dee kept his personal laptop on the desk in the small room he used as a home office. He never locked it when he was home. He'd never had a reason to, I suppose. Or he didn't think I'd ever look. He was in the shower one morning. I had maybe 8 minutes. I went to the browser history first. Most of it was cleared. But not all of it. One tab was still open, minimized at the bottom of the screen. It was a property listing. A rental apartment. 2 bedrooms. In a neighborhood about 40 minutes from our house. The listing was saved. Bookmarked. The lease start date listed in the description was 2 weeks away. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Then I went back to the kitchen. When he came downstairs, I handed him a coffee and asked if he wanted eggs. He said sure. I made eggs. That same afternoon, while he was out, I went through the filing cabinet. The lock hadn't been reset properly. It opened with my key. Most of what was inside was normal. Insurance documents. The deed to the house. Old tax returns. But in the back, behind a folder labeled Utilities 2021, there was an envelope. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. It was a consultation summary from a family law attorney, dated 4 months ago. 4 months ago I was 7 months pregnant. The summary outlined a proposed divorce filing strategy. It referenced our joint assets. It referenced the house. It referenced, and this part one had to read twice, a claim that I had been financially dependent and non-contributing during the marriage, which he intended to use to argue for a reduced settlement. Non-contributing. I had worked full-time until my 6th month of pregnancy. I had contributed to that account every single paycheck for 9 years. The document also noted, in the attorney's handwriting in the margin, client advised to delay filing until after birth to avoid optics issues. After birth. He had been planning this since before our daughter was born. He had sat in that hospital room. He had taken that photo of me holding her. And he had already spoken to a divorce attorney. I put the envelope back exactly where I found it. I locked the cabinet. I walked to the living room and picked up my daughter from her bouncer and held her for a long time. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I didn't leave. Confronting him would have ruined everything. The first person I called was my sister. Not to cry. Not to vent. I called her because she is methodical in a way that I am not, and I needed someone who would think, not react. I told her everything in one sitting. The transfers. The apartment listing. The attorney's consultation summary. The margin note about optics. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then she said, "You need a family law attorney before he files. Not after. Before." I already knew that. But hearing it said out loud made it real in a different way. She offered to watch the baby the following morning. I found my attorney through a referral. A friend of a friend who had gone through something similar 3 years prior. I'm not going to use her name here, but I will say this: she was exactly what I needed. Not aggressive. Not theatrical. She asked questions and she wrote things down, and she didn't once tell me everything was going to be okay. She just kept asking questions. I laid out everything I had. The screenshots. The printed bank statements my sister had received and scanned back to me. The photo of the property listing. My account of the consultation summary and where I found it. She looked at everything carefully. Then she said, "The transfers are the most important piece. Do you have any idea where that account belongs to?" I didn't. Not yet. She said we needed to find out. She also told me something I hadn't considered. She said that because he had consulted an attorney and had a documented strategy in place, and because that strategy included misrepresenting my financial contributions, we were not dealing with just a divorce. We were potentially dealing with deliberate financial concealment. Which is a different thing legally. A more serious thing. She told me not to move any money. Not to confront him. Not to change my behavior at home in any visible way. Let him feel safe, she said. Safe people make mistakes. I drove home and made dinner. Over the next 10 days, I built a file. I printed everything and kept the copies at my sister's house. I kept digital backups in the private email account and also on a USB drive that I stored in my car, in a compartment under the seat. I was breastfeeding during this period. Getting maybe 4 hours of sleep at a stretch. Running on something I couldn't name. Not adrenaline exactly. Something quieter and more sustained than adrenaline. A kind of focus I had never accessed before. Dee was still coming and going. Still performing the role of new father with that same checklist energy. He brought home groceries once. He assembled a storage shelf in the nursery. He was present enough that anyone looking from outside would have seen a couple adjusting to a new baby. What they wouldn't have seen was me, at 3 a.m., feeding my daughter in the dark and mentally reviewing what I still needed. My attorney came back to me with information about the account the transfers had been going to. It took her contact at a forensic accounting firm 2 days to trace it through the routing number I'd provided. The account was a personal savings account. It was not in DS name. It was in the name of a woman I will refer to only as L. I had never heard that name before in my life. But when I looked at the transfer timeline again with that information, a pattern emerged that my attorney confirmed was common in cases like this. The transfers had started 8 months ago. 1 month after I became pregnant, and we reduced our discretionary spending to save for the baby. He had been quietly redirecting money from our joint account into her account for 8 months. Steadily. Consistently. While I was pregnant. While I was on bed rest. While I was in the hospital delivering his child. My attorney said the total of $22,000, combined with the documented intent to misrepresent my financial contributions, gave us grounds to pursue not just equitable asset division but a claim of financial fraud within the marriage. She also said something else. She said that he had still not filed. That we had a narrow window to file first. And that filing first, with everything we had already documented, would put us in a significantly stronger position than responding to whatever strategy his attorney had outlined in that consultation summary. I asked her how long we had. She said probably days. Not weeks. I asked her what she needed from me. She gave me a list. I completed everything on the list within 48 hours. On a Wednesday morning, while Dee was at work and my daughter was asleep in her crib, my attorney filed. That afternoon I received a confirmation. I saved it to the private email. I saved it to the USB drive. I texted my sister a single word. Done. She texted back a single word. Good. That evening Dee came home at his usual time. He put his bag down by the door. He looked into the nursery. He came to the kitchen where I was standing at the counter and he asked what was for dinner. I told him I'd made soup. He sat down. He looked at his phone. He had no idea. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. He was served on a Thursday. I was not home when it happened. I had taken my daughter to my sister's house the night before. I told Dee I needed help with the baby for a few days. That my sister had offered and I was tired. He said that was fine. He barely looked up from his phone when I said it. I was sitting at my sister's kitchen table when my attorney called to confirm the papers had been delivered. I thanked her. I hung up. I poured myself a glass of water. My sister watched me from across the table. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it honestly. "Tired," I said. But not afraid anymore. That was the difference. For months there had been a low, constant fear running underneath everything. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind that makes your hands shake. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in your chest and makes you careful about every word you say, every room you walk into. That fear was gone. It had left some time between filing and this moment and I hadn't noticed exactly when. Dee called 40 minutes after the papers were delivered. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Not anger. Closer to the sound of someone who has just realized the ground they were standing on was not as solid as they thought. He said we needed to talk. He said this was not what it looked like. He said to please call him back. I forwarded the voicemail to my attorney and did not call him back. The first hearing was scheduled 3 weeks out. In that 3 weeks, several things happened in a specific order. My attorney submitted the bank records. All of them. The transfers were documented clearly, amounts, dates, destination account. The forensic accounting contact provided a formal report confirming the pattern and destination. $22,460. Over 8 months. Consistent. Deliberate. DS attorney filed a counter-response. It was thinner than I expected. They argued the transfers were loans to a family member. That they were informal and intended to be repaid. They submitted no documentation to support this. My attorney submitted the property listing. The bookmarked rental apartment. The lease start date that had since passed, which meant he had either signed a lease or withdrawn from it. Either way it demonstrated intent and planning. Then my attorney submitted the consultation summary. Not a copy. Not a photo. She had obtained the original through the discovery process. The margin note was clearly visible. Client advised to delay filing until after birth to avoid optics issues. DS attorney requested a continuance. It was denied. The hearing itself was quiet. That is the thing about these proceedings that no one tells you. There is no shouting. There is no dramatic moment where the truth lands like a thunderclap. There are 2 tables, and attorneys, and a judge who has seen versions of this situation many times before and regards the documentation with the same careful attention she would give any other set of facts. Dee sat at his table. I sat at mine. We did not look at each other very much. When the bank records were entered into evidence, his attorney said the loans argument again. The judge asked for documentation. His attorney said documentation was forthcoming. The judge made a note. When the consultation summary was entered, there was a pause. The judge read the margin note. She looked up. She asked DS attorney to explain the delay strategy in the context of the claim that my contributions to the marriage had been minimal. His attorney began an answer. The judge stopped him. She asked the question again, more precisely. There was no good answer. Everyone in the room understood that. The settlement took 6 more weeks to finalize. I am not going to list every number. That is not the point of this. What I will say is that the documented financial concealment changed the shape of everything. The house. The joint savings. The assets Dee had believed he'd successfully repositioned over those 8 months, they were factored back in. The forensic report made sure of that. L.'s name appeared in the proceedings as the recipient of the transferred funds. There was no further legal action I pursued in that direction. I didn't need to. The record existed. That was enough. Dee did not get the settlement his attorney had outlined in that consultation summary 4 months before our daughter was born. Not even close. The final document came by email on a Friday afternoon. I was home by then. My home. My daughter was in the bouncer on the kitchen floor, watching the mobile above her turn slowly. I read the email once. Then I closed the laptop and sat on the floor next to my daughter and watched the mobile with her for a while. She was 10 weeks old. She had her whole face still figuring itself out, the way newborns do. She looked at the shapes above her with complete and serious attention. I thought about the woman I had been 6 months ago. 7 months. Before the bed rest, before the hospital ceiling tiles, before the kiss that was too quick. That woman had trusted completely and had not been wrong to trust, she just hadn't known yet what she was trusting. I didn't feel angry at her. I felt something closer to gratitude. Because she had paid attention. When it mattered, she had paid attention and she had not reacted and she had not confronted and she had not let fear make her loud. She had been quiet and careful and she had kept her daughter safe. That was the only victory I needed. Not the settlement. Not the legal record. Not the look on anyone's face in any courtroom. Just this. The kitchen floor. The mobile turning. My daughter looking up at shapes she was still learning to name. I did not have to be afraid anymore. I did not have to be careful about every word, every room. I could just sit here. That night, everything was quiet.